Now that we have the model exported and all the textures exported, let's bring it into a new Spark project and start adding all these materials together. So I'll just drag in the FBX, and then drag in the diffuse, the normal, and the ORM. The emissive we don't need because it's completely black. And we'll just drag the model in just to see it up here. And this material is set to flat, so we'll change it to physically based. And now let's plug in these materials, or these textures. And for now, we'll just do no compression. I think the file size on these is fairly large, so we'll compress these later. So we'll rename this to mat pip. And then assign all these. So we have under the albedo, which is the diffuse, or the color. Under the surface parameters, the ORM texture is the ORM. And then normal is normal. And it's looking pretty dark right now because we don't have an environment, so it doesn't have anything to reflect. So we can search the AI library and just grab one of these default ones. And let's try something that's fairly bright, maybe this sunset. And now that added it there, and now you can see it's nice and shiny on this little guy. And it looks pretty nice. It looks like the colors might be a little muted, so let's see if this is set to linear or RGB. So in this texture, well actually the color I think might be a grayish. Let's make sure that's all the way white. And in the default material color, it's set to linear. Let's see if RGB looks any different. Yeah, that looks a little bit more accurate to how we exported it. So I think this is what we want. And this lens looks great because as you zoom in, you can really see that reflection on there. And it looks like this little dot is probably this direction light. So if you don't want that, you can just turn that off. But then we lose some of that light information. And it does look kind of nice with it on, so I'll just leave that on. We could also play with the ambient light. But that also helps boost up the brightness a bit, so we'll keep both those on. So now let's start figuring out how to animate this. So first, let's add a little bit of ambient animation to make it look like this thing's floating. And to do that, let's add a null in here first. And then put the little robot guy inside the null. And we want the null to be actually above the robot, so I'm just going to pull the robot down, the model of it. And then we can pull this null back up. So as we animate the rotation of it, it'll kind of, rotate around this axis as if it's floating because the thrusters are pushing down. So if it goes off to the side, we kind of want it to move like this, and it'll make more sense once we actually get it animated. Maybe I'll move it down even more. Okay, so for now, let's just animate this null by clicking the little dot here next to rotation. And there's a few ways we can do this. I think if we use a couple different loop animations and add those together, we can get a pretty nice kind of randomized rotation here. Let's do a loop animation, mirror that, and then in progress, we'll drag this out and make a transition patch. And right now it's set to 0, 0, 0. So we can try maybe -5 all the way across. And then +5 all the way across. And the curve will make it nice and smooth, so maybe quadratic. So now you can see it's rotating just along that one axis because it's going, pretty much straight between these values. So let's take all of this, copy paste that, and then we'll add these two values together. But let's change the duration of this one to be 3, and let's make that 2. And these values, let's make a little closer to 0. Let's say about 2 and -2 each. We'll add all this together. And it's still kind of moving that one axis more. Maybe let's try inverting these values. And I'm just hitting up and down on the arrow keys, just kind of quickly scrub those. And I think if we add one more of these, we can get it a little bit more randomized. Maybe this one will make even slower. And we'll add the result of that and this. And for this one, maybe let's just change the Y value. And let's just crank this kind of high and see what happens first. So you can see it's kind of looking left and then right as it's wobbling around. And I think these wobbles are just too intense, so let's shrink these values down a bit. And let's see what it looks like with these loop animations a little shorter. See, that's looking a little bit more randomized, like he's just floating around. Still looks a little wobbly. I'll make these all really low. There you go. Now it's just a nice, subtle little floaty animation. And I want it to be kind of following my face, and so we'll add a face tracker. And then instead of putting the null object inside of it, we need to grab the information out of the face tracker by dragging it out. And then using this 3D position, we'll control the position of the null. And if we drag it straight in, it'll just be locked to me. And it looks like it's behind me because we're in the focal distance. So it's adding the position of this relative to that. So if we just drag the null out of the focal distance, now it's where we want it. And you can see it's facing forward even as I'm rotating because we're only controlling the position with my face. But we don't want it to be so locked on. So let's smooth this out and add a little bit of a delay as well. So I'll do a delay first. So it's a 1 second. And then this is an XYZ value. So we need to unpack it, use exponential smoothing, and then pack it back. So unpack these 3 values, add exponential smoothing, and then we'll pack them all together. And it's set to 200, I think, milliseconds by default. I think the delay might be a little big, but the smoothing seems like it might be working. Yeah, I don't know if I like the delay on there that much. Maybe just a teeny bit of delay. That feels better. And I don't love it at my chin level, so if we take this position, we can just add a little bit of value to this. And we'll set it to vector 3, that way we can control just the Y value. And I think I'll put it maybe right next to my face. Maybe 0.15, and then negative 0.15 in the X. That's too much. Maybe just 0.1. That way it's just kind of floating around right next to my face. And if I change this to an iPad view, I can see a little bit wider of a view. Now I think it'd look better if he was facing maybe more towards center and not out as far. So in these values, let's take this transition. Instead of positive 10 to negative 10, let's do maybe 10 to 20. So now it's facing just a little bit more in towards center. And right now the thruster is right at eye level. So let's push this up a little bit further. So in the Y, let's go 0.18. Or even 0.2. And now we want to add some particles to these thrusters. So if we right-click on the model and expand all, we can actually grab the thrusters and put the particles in here. And the thrusters are just one object, so both of these are attached. So we'll have to manually place them. If these were individual and the center point was at the middle of both of them, we could just drop the particles right in and they would fit. But because it's one object, we'll have to do it a little bit manually. We'll change the spray angle on the X to 180. Now let's make a material for this. Name it Matte Jet Smoke. Make it flat. And I'm going to drag in my trusty texture of a fog. This one here. It's only 15 kilobytes, so it's already very compressed. And we'll drop that into the texture. Turn down the opacity quite a bit. And let's make it kind of a reddish, burning looking color. And that's okay for that. And we want these to fade out as well, so we need to pull in that script we used earlier. The particle fade script. And that doesn't do anything at first because we need to rename the stuff inside of this. So first, let's just duplicate this for now and move it straight over. So now there's two of these and we can name them jet right and jet left. So in our particle fade script, if we go to edit it, we'll just duplicate this whole thing, copy paste, and then change this to jet left and jet right. And then save that. So now these are fading out, and I think they're scaling up just a little bit as they fade. Yeah, you can see the scale gets a little bit bigger there at the end. Now with both of these selected, let's crank up the birth rate a little bit. And instead of using the alpha for the material, let's change it to add. That way we get more brightness when they're overlapping, so it'll get, you know, a lot hotter up top. And you can see they're kind of clipping on each other because the alpha is overlapping. So over here, let's turn off right to depth buffer. That should fix that. But it still uses the depth test, so it still appears behind these front pieces. Oh, looks like this one got way out of whack. Let's go to the orthographic top view. And I should just pause it so my face isn't moving it. I'll just make sure these are positioned right in the center. That one looks good. There we go. Hit F to zoom back in there. Okay, that's looking pretty good, but instead of coming from the center, it makes more sense to come from this kind of ring here, which is where the hydrogen plasma gets emitted. So we'll select both of these and change the emitter from point to ring. Obviously that's too large. Let's go back to the top view actually. So to orthographic. And it looks like the ring is, you know, around here, so we want it to be like a fifth that size. So instead of 0.1, let's try 0.02. And these particles are kind of large, so it's hard to see exactly where they're going. So let's take the scale down to 0.001 just for now. Let's go back to perspective. Looks like that's about right. Now I can crank up the size again. And I think in order for this to work, the birth rate might need to be quite a bit higher. And then we can maybe dial down the size of this ring a little bit. Maybe 0.018, and then we can make the hole in the middle 0.010, or just 1. That way they're not being emitted right in the center, but along the outside. And it looks like this is still a little large there, so let's just keep tapping this down until it fits right in that ring. Looks like 0.014 is pretty good. Now the spray angle, let's just change all these to 0, just so there's no spread right there. And the speed could be a little bit higher. And because it's faster, we're seeing more of the separation. So let's turn up the birth rate, but then turn down the lifespan. There, now it looks like it's actually using some propulsion and not just kind of a slow burn off. And now you can see if the background is dark, these are quite a bit darker, but when it's over something lighter, then these start kind of starting to clip out a little bit, but that's okay. You can see if these all overlap too, they start to get pretty bright. Now let's duplicate these again and make a smaller kind of blue flame coming out of it. So select both of these, Control D to duplicate. Now this one will be jet right blue and jet left blue. And these will be a bit smaller, so we'll go to particle scale, make this maybe half the size. And then we'll duplicate our material to make a new one for this blue smoke. Call it jet smoke blue. Change this to kind of a light blue. And then we need to apply it to both of these. And that looks kind of cool, but it's a little abrupt, so we need to probably add these as well to this particle fade script. So I'll just copy that and duplicate it twice. And then just add blue to these names. And then make sure to save that. And it should automatically update. Okay, it looks like this one is working, but this one might not be. See, jet right blue, jet left blue. Jet right blue. Oh, both of these are jet right blue, that's why. And I think the blue could be a little bit smaller for the emitter. So let's just make this a teeny bit smaller here and here. And it's a little hard to see those, so let's take the opacity of the blue and turn it up just a bit. And then the opacity of the smoke and turn it down just a bit. And you never want to go too crazy with the particles, but just to kind of see how this might look even better, let's just crank these way up to 300. And now you're getting a real nice little booster there. I think the blue particles might actually be too small because you see the individual pieces quite a bit. So I'll turn that scale up to maybe 0.008. And then now that they're bigger, we need to turn down the opacity just a bit. There we go. That's a pretty good balance. And now you can see as it moves around, the particles kind of follow behind. If we want them to be a little bit more locked on, we can just select all of them and change that to world space. So now when they move around, you see they're completely straight up. They don't kind of lag behind. And if it was actually like a jet engine, these would be going so fast that you wouldn't see any angle as the thing moves. So this way might be a little bit more accurate how it should look. And let's just add one more little animation to this by having a screen tap. And we'll affect the rotation. So we'll need to deal with this patch again. So let's grab a screen tap. And then that will trigger an animation. And the progress of that will be piped through a transition patch. And we want to do a full 360 rotation along the Y. So we'll just do a little loop. We can smooth that out with a sinusoidal or quadratic in and out. And we'll need to add this position to these two. So we'll just throw an add in there, connect that, and kind of interrupt that flow. And I think that should be it. Let's see if that works. We need to switch over to simulate touch. Then click. Now he does a cute little spin. And it seems like once we do it once, it's not working anymore. So to fix this, let's add a delay for this trigger. And we're doing 1 second here, so we'll make a delay of 1 second. And then we'll reset it after 1 second. Let's just restart this. Now if we tap it, it'll spin. And then you'll see this goes back to 0 because after this animation plays, it resets this back to 0. So we'll be able to keep clicking this and it'll keep spinning around. And it looks like it snaps a little right at the end. Maybe we're resetting a little too early. Let's see if we slow this down. There we go. Now it doesn't reset too early. Although it still is snapping. I think it might be because we have these set to 1 degree. Let's set those to 0. There we go. Now it's nice and smooth. And if we wanted, instead of resetting this, we could change it to reverse. So after 1.5 seconds, he'll spin back around. I think doing it just to reset makes a little bit more sense. So now this robot follows us. It has a little bit of idle animation. And we have an interaction when we tap. It'll spin around just once.